Fournette, Brate, and Canales next on this edition of the Bucs Report. Let's go! Well, hello and welcome in to this edition of the Bucs Report. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. You can find it online at Bucs Report. Check them out online, bucsreport.com. You can find it on YouTube. Just search for the Bucs Report. And of course, you can find this audio podcast wherever you find your audio podcasts. Just search for the Bucs Report. My name is Dan Holman. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Bucs Minutecast. So in this edition, we're going to talk about how the Bucs are most likely going to be cutting ties with Cam Brate and what that means. And is it the right move ultimately at the end of the day? This is a guy that was, willing to redo his deal to kind of work into the Buccaneers' plans. And now he's getting cut. Is that ultimately what's best, or was it the right time to do it? We'll talk about that in the show. And then we will talk about playoff Lenny moving on from the Bucs. He says that he wanted to move on from the Bucs. The Bucs are saying, we moved on from you. What is really the case? We'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about this team going forward, free agency. We'll talk about the combine and who's going to be on this Bucs team next year. But just to get it going here, talking about your Bucs. Yes, it is Bucs 24/7, 365 on the Bucs Report, because it is the Bucs Report at the end of the day. News surrounding your Buccaneers. Bucs tight end Cam Brate was informed by GM Jason Light of the team's plans to release him prior to March 15th. The Bucs have a ton of respect for the undrafted vet. After 9 seasons, he caught Tom Brady's final TD pass, which could also be his last as well. Is there the possibility that this was the last season for Cam Brate in the NFL? I mean, just thinking about all over the years, I remember him even playing back in the Jameis Winston years. Just a really steady guy, a great guy in the community. I'm, ultimately at the end of the day, kind of disappointed to see the Bucs move on from him. But if that's what they got to do, that's what they got to do. Brate is another cut we laid out as likely source of cap relief for the Bucs. They shed $3 million in salary and $1 million roster bonus. Works out to $2 million in cap savings for 2023 as they continue to work to get under the cap, writes Greg Auman. Again, it's one of the things. It's a dollars thing. It's an accounting thing. I think that ultimately the Bucs and the Bucs fans liked Cam Brate. I liked Cam Brate. Cam Brate took pay cuts each of his last 3 years to stay on the Bucs roster, won a Super Bowl, and still leaves with $28 million in career earnings over 9 years. His biggest reception was the catch of the Lombardi Trophy from Brady over the Hillsborough River during the Super Bowl boat ride. So he will ever be endeared and etched in Bucs lore and what this team is, the second Super Bowl that they've won and what it means. And nothing will ever take that away from the Bucs fans. No matter what this team looks like over the next couple of years, say they're not the Bucs team that we've seen the last couple of years, nothing will ever take away, those special moments with Brady here and Brate and just the run that they went on to win a Super Bowl. To take this team that was quite deplorable, to be honest with you, before Brady got here, if we want to take a look at even the Winston years, tough years, suffices to say. In short order, Brady came here and righted this ship. He turned the ship completely around and got this team to win a Super Bowl. Sometimes people are like, well, yeah, we know that. Don't let that wash over you. What he took this team from and what he brought this team to should never be diminished. And Cam Brate was a part of that. And we should always, remember his contributions to this team. Brate has spent his entire 9-year career with the Bucs, and it was part of the team's 2020 Super Bowl squad. The 31-year-old caught 20 passes for 174 yards in 11 games last season. He served as a depth option behind rookie Cade Otton alongside Ko Kieft and Kyle Rudolph. Monday morning quarterbacking, taking a look at it, should have Cam Brate had a more active role on this team. I know there's injuries and that kind of thing to deal with. That is, a story for another day. But in 126 games with the Bucs, Brate caught 273 passes for 2,857 yards and 33 touchdowns. His best season came in 2016 when he caught 57 passes for 660 yards and 8 touchdowns in 15 games. Given Brate's dwindling role, his release was a no-brainer. And, that's an easy thing to say as a writer, as a talking head, as, someone that's, observes this team from afar. We know what's right for this Buccaneers team. And I hear what you're saying. Don't go speaking logic to me. I know that his time with the Bucs is up, but it doesn't, change the fact that I think he played a big role on this team. And let's not diminish. Let's not be revisionist and say, well, Cam Brate, it's your time to ride out into the sunset. Forget what you did in the Super Bowl run and what you did for this team. No, let's take a moment to remember what he brought to this team. And, he was at least in part responsible for that Super Bowl run. And it's easy to just kind of be dismissive and say, well, on to the next one. I, for one, am thankful for his contributions to this team and wish him nothing but the best going forward. If he did, in fact, play his last game of NFL football, then I wish him the best. He is going to ride out to the sun in the sunset with a boatload of money. But, that's what it's about. However, with Ott and Keefe, the only tight ends on the roster, Tampa Bay may address the position via draft or free agency. Dalton Kincaid, Michael Mayer, and Luke Musgrave are some of the top prospects in the 2023 draft. If the Bucs wanted to sign a free agent tight end, solid options include Mike Gesicki and Dalton Schultz. However, they'd surely cost more than Brate's $5 million. The Bucs are in a pivotal offseason following the retirement of quarterback Tom Brady, while the team needs to bolster tight end depth. Addressing the hole left by Brady at quarterback is the top priority. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show, this article in the Bleacher Report. But, just talking about people kind of just forgetting how things go. I cover a few different sports teams and I see it over all of that, across all of them, where they're just pretty dismissive, even though, one of the teams I cover, the guy scored the game-winning goal in the Stanley Cup. They're like, well, on to the next one. If you take a look at Cam Brate here, caught some pivotal touchdowns, caught the Lombardi Trophy from Brady, on to the next one. Would they be better served to try and bring him back, being that the other options that they listed there were going to be more expensive? Tough questions for the Bucs, and I understand the position that they're in, that dwindling role that they referred to on this team, but it is a team in transition. And what's the ceiling on this team next year anyway? I guess it ultimately remains to be seen who they have at QB. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show, but a team in transition. And it just speaks to the changes that's going on in this team. And it really is going to be interesting to see the face of this Bucs team in the following years, right? As Tom Brady left, his magnetism that brought a lot of those players to this team, the uncertainty and the fact that it might be an unproven commodity in Kyle Trask, I think is going to be a bit more difficult to attract some big name players here. I mean, don't make no mistake. This team is still stacked with A level players. Don't get me wrong, but not having that proven commodity at QB as of right now, as I record this, that's a tough thing. Then you also factor into the fact that they have an unproven commodity at head coach. Some people say that he should have been, the next one that was riding out into the sunset. The onus falls on him as well. If we want to get into clock mismanagement and his wanting to play it safe all the time and not go for it on fourth downs, that kind of thing. Again, we don't want to rewrite history. Also, Byron Leftwich, there's just so many different intangibles there. You're really starting to see into focus the role that Bruce Arians played on this team. And, a lot of people say, well, Bruce Arians, he didn't really get involved in the offense, and he was. That's nonsense. I do think to a certain extent that Bruce Arians was looking over his shoulder a little bit, or, kind of telling these other guys what to do, because what you saw this last year was disjointed. And you can't just say, well, it was this or it was that. It was a different head coach, right? And he didn't live up to potential. So it is an interesting thing going forward. And what kind of leash is he going to be given, head coach Todd Bowles? Is he going to be given another full season? If it's like any other team around professional sports, it's a what have you done for me lately league. And if the Bucs are not winning how much of that are they going to be able to stomach? And I know, I've listened to this on the Rick Stroud podcast, and I listened to it Locked On Bucs and Greg Auman and all the big hitters that cover the Bucs, and they all say, well, you can't have this turnstile of head coaches going through here. And I get that, and I hear it on all your publications and podcasts every day when I listen to them. But to a certain extent, it's win now. How much are the Bucs fans going to be able to stomach going from high of the high, having the greatest of all time at QB to whatever they're going to be next year? And I would love to be proven wrong. Don't get me wrong. I hope they aim for the ceiling, and I hope they aim for the stars, and I hope they end up winning a Super Bowl. But is that going to be the case if you got Kyle Trask at QB next year? Those are the questions that you're going to have to answer, and it's tough ones for the Bucs going forward. All right, so after the break here, we're going to talk about the Bucs moving on from playoff Lenny, or did playoff Lenny move on from the Bucs? We'll talk about that next. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report, your premier destination on Buccaneers news. On the Bucs Report, of course, it's Bucs news 24/7, 365, because at the end of the day, it is the Bucs Report. We're not going to be talking about anything else here. So in this next segment here, we're going to be talking about playoff Lenny, Leonard Fournette, and the position, the running back position, and who is going to be, the options at running back. We know that we have Rachaad White, a future probably one of the great running backs of this team. I don't want to, hoist him up too high, but what we saw last year, he shows flashes of promise out there. We also have Keyshawn Vaughn in the mix. Giovanni Bernard's a free agent, those kind of things. But ultimately, who is going to be playing at the running back position? We know that we have Rachaad White for sure. But who is going to also be in the mix there at running back, being that the Bucs are what it sounds like moving off from playoff Lenny here. The Bucs plan to release running back Leonard Fournette on March 15th at the start of the new league year. A league source confirmed to The Athletic. Here's what you need to know. Fournette, 28, tallied 668 rushing yards and 3 rushing touchdowns in 2022. His third season with the Bucs, he notched a career high with 523 receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. The number 4 pick in the 2017 NFL draft spent his first 3 seasons with the Jags, recording 1,000 yards seasons in 17 and 19. And what does this boil down to? Well, let's just boil it down and get down to brass tacks here. He was upset that he wasn't getting the rock enough, to use an Antonio Brown term, and that upset him. He had to be consoled by Rachaad White, the rookie running back. He's like, hey man, it's going to be okay. You'll get the football next time. So kind of an interesting move for a veteran. And we saw this before in the previous season. So he is a guy that gets, a little bit of a thin skin. I love Leonard Fournette. I do love him. I think that when he's engaged, he's a huge dude. He's a running back. He's a difficult guy to bring down. So I have nothing disparaging to say other than the fact that maybe he's a bit thin skinned. He did say in an article that, he kind of came here ostensibly because Tom Brady came here. And now that the Brady circus is heading out into the sunset, where Brady is going to pursue, what have I heard, stand-up comedy and race car driving. It's funny how just, the circus surrounds him. And I sometimes wonder, is that by design? Does he have publicists that kind of just whirl up this big storm just to keep publicity going for him because he's got that whole TB12 brand going? Because ultimately, if he takes a year off, he's going to have a hard time selling, 5-gallon water cans and TB12 t-shirts if he's not, a known commodity. And I know what you're saying. You've obviously heard of Air Jordans and how long has Michael Jordan played. I get all that. But you know what I'm saying here is that Leonard Fournette said that he was leaving because Brady left. I did read that in an article. I wasn't there when the conversation was recording, but that is what I'm hearing. Why the Bucs are releasing Fournette. The Bucs' decision to cut Fournette makes sense for multiple reasons. The 28-year-old back was set to count for $8.6 million against the cap, while $2 million for his 2023 salary is guaranteed. The Bucs will cut him by the start of the league year to avoid owing him another $2 million guaranteed. Fournette's release also has something to do with the fact that the Bucs also have a younger option in, I talked about it, Rachaad White, who fared well in place of the injured veteran as a rookie 3rd-round pick in 2022. Fournette still has plenty left in the tank, Bucs GM Jason Light acknowledged on Tuesday. However, while starting over at quarterback, the Bucs also need to create financial flexibility and get younger and more effective at multiple positions. And the cost-saving release of Fournette should help position them to do this. And, to a certain extent, it seems like they're being a bit dismissive of Leonard Fournette and his contributions. Let's not be revisionist either, and remember playoff Lenny and what he did in the Super Bowl. Again, we're so easy to rewrite history, aren't we? But I understand the problem that the pickle, if you will, that the Bucs are in. There's that dead cap space that Tom Brady left behind. Those are all the perils of kicking the proverbial can down the road. And now the bankers coming to you saying, pay your bills or get the F out of the house. And the Bucs are like, well, we need a place to live, so we better pay those bills. So they are looking at their expenses. They're putting it into a spreadsheet, and they're saying, we're spending too much at McDonald's. We're spending too much at... We got to get rid of Leonard Fournette because he costs too much money. So subsequently, down the road, Leonard Fournette goes probably to help another team kill it out there because at the end of the day, he still has a lot in the tank. This is the same guy that people are talking trash about because he came into camp fat. I wish I could be fat like that, and people say that about me. I mean, I'm not nearly in that kind of shape, and people don't say disparaging things like that about me. But in any event, when you play in professional sports, it's difficult. Leonard Fournette, it's the what have you done for me lately league. He was injured. And then Rachaad White kind of came in, a guy that, Tom Brady said is this studious player, has helped this team. He brought his notebook to camp and took notes, kind of like it was a college course. And guess what? Not only the nerdism of it, but also the fact that he was able to kill it on the field. And you know what? He is, as it stands right now, as I record this in March, the heir apparent as the number one running back for your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That is just the case. And, there's a lot of time between now and OTAs and next fall. Who else is going to be in the mix? Like I spoke of, there's Keyshawn Vaughn and whatever they plan on doing with Giovanni Bernard. Again, Bernard is another guy that I think has shown flashes of greatness, but we didn't get a chance to see enough of it because he was injured. I just remember his first season here. He played rather well, but yada, yada, he isn't living up to potential. So probably off out into the sunset goes Giovanni Bernard as well. I guess it remains to be seen what the Bucs are going to be doing at the draft, the combine, free agency, all that kind of thing. There are so many balls in the air, if you will. It's a baseball term. It's not as weird as it sounds. So that is what the Bucs are having to deal with right now. And there is some tough questions going forward. Who else is going to help bolster the running back position for the Bucs? You can't have one guy doing it alone. And those are the options as I know it right now. Rachaad White and Keyshawn Vaughn. Keyshawn Vaughn, again, another guy, not being a revisionist, in the brief glimpses that we saw of him last season, played rather well. So I mean, it's difficult, it's a difficult thing going forward. It's just my assessment that they're going to have to be aggressive in the free agency and the off season and draft well and cross your fingers and toes and hope that comes to fruition, because otherwise it could be some tough sledding for this Bucs team going forward. I, for one, don't want to go back into the Dirk Cutter era, the Jameis Winston, the like, we're ahead, but I'm going to throw 18 touchdowns and lose a football game that we were winning. I don't want to go back to that. And I'm not saying that Kyle Trask is Jameis Winston 2.0, but what I am saying is I would like a proven commodity. I want someone to come to this team and have, Trask and whoever that next quarterback is, duke it out, whoever that may be. And in the next segment, I'll talk about, the different options that I'm hearing out there. But Baker Mayfield, that kind of thing. Is that he going to be an upgrade? People will talk crap about him too, but is that because he was playing on the Browns? There's something about that as well. All right. So after the break here, we are going to talk about who is going to be the next quarterback of the Buccaneers. We know it's Trask ostensibly, but one quarterback can't do it. We know we need at least one or two more to field a team. You ultimately got to have at least two or three quarterbacks to run a successful NFL franchise. Who are those other options going to be? There are some intriguing names out there. And I'll also talk about the free agency market and on the Buccaneers and who comes back. I'll talk about that next. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report, where it is Bucs news 24/7, 365, because it is the Bucs Report. If this was called something else, we could call it that. But this is the Bucs Report on the Bucs Report Podcast Network, where we're talking Bucs all the time. And in the next segment here, like I talked about, who is going to be the next QB for your Buccaneers? We know that we got Kyle Trask, who has been redshirted almost his entire career. We ultimately don't know what we have in Kyle Trask, do we? We really don't know. He got a brief glimpse here, and it's one of the tough things, and I talked about it in my other podcast, the Bucs Minute Cast there, that it's a tough position for the Bucs to be in or a backup quarterback, because you have just a small window like this big to prove yourself. And if you screw up even just a little bit, even though you haven't had any, real world reps except for the practice squad, you're done. You're garbage. It's a tough position for a quarterback, a backup quarterback. If you take a look, he wasn't even the backup quarterback. He was the backup to the backup quarterback. It's a tough position for these guys to do anything. And there are some intriguing names. If I listen to these pods, I read these publications, they say that it's going to be some grizzled vet that's going to come here and they're going to duke it out. Well, maybe it won't be that grizzled. I've heard Baker Mayfield. I wouldn't really, revere him as grizzled. But the next guy that I'm going to talk about here is a name that has been rumored quite often, and that is Jimmy Garoppolo, a guy that we know that played for the 49ers and subsequently is kind of an injury machine. Those are some of the facts that kind of are worrisome to me. All of that might make it easy to forget the NFC's highest rated qualified passer from the 2022 season will become a free agent on March 15th. In fact, we're talking about the 6th highest rated qualified passer in the NFL history. He's 31 years old and in the midst of what is likely his prime. His teams are 40-17 when he serves as the starting quarterback, and he's coming off an excellent season. So, again, we're all a bit distracted right now, and events related to rookie class as well as Jackson, Rodgers, Carr are more pressing. Nothing can happen with Jimmy G for a couple of weeks with the new league launches. He'll undoubtedly be a focal point during the initial wave of free agency, but because teams fall in love with prospects like Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Will Levi, and Anthony Richardson, and because players like Carr, Rodgers, and Jackson could become available and have bigger names and longer resumes, it's entirely possible Garoppolo will continue to receive less attention than his own resume indicates he's worth come the start of free agency. And, I've heard different things, and there are a lot of, official and unofficial Bucs experts out there, and most of them have podcasts and blogs out there. You know who I'm talking about. They're very active on Twitter. And they're all like, well, what's next? Is it Baker Mayfield going to come here? Is it going to be, Jimmy Garoppolo? Yeah, it's probably going to be one of them. You're right. I mean, these so-called experts, and there's a lot of, not just Bucs fans, but people that revere themselves as Bucs experts. Again, I cover two other major sports, NHL and baseball for different teams. And there's no other, sports out there that people revere as experts more than the NFL. It's not that I just have a podcast on the NFL, on the Bucs. I am an expert on the Buccaneers. And it's kind of close-minded. I don't think I know everything. Why in the world do all these people think they know everything? It's the case all the way out there. Just look out into the Twitter sphere and look up the Bucs. It's everywhere to be seen out there. But in any event, they are going to need a Jimmy Garoppolo. They're going to need a Baker Mayfield. Who else have I heard out there that's intriguing? Heineke. He's another one. If that guy doesn't get a Heineken beer commercial, there's no justice in this world. But I think that he has shown flashes of greatness. And we know that some of the cards are already starting to fall. Some quarterbacks are going to this team and that team and cross them off the list. And, it's a tough thing to go through. And who ultimately is going to be the future QB? Yeah, again, it can't be just one quarterback. We need more than one quarterback to field the team. Who is going to be the other options? And I don't want to hear two guys that I need to Google search to figure out who they are. I want a known commodity to at least give this Bucs team a glimmer of a chance of doing something next year. I mean, let's face it, it is a polarizing thing from going from the greatest of all time to a guy that has virtually no playing experience. That's what we're going in with. But the thing that worries me about it is they're like, well, there's no way that the Bucs could do that. They would never be that stupid. Well, look at what they did at the head coaching position. You had the greatest quarterback of all time, and you had an unproven commodity in head coach. I know he was head coach for the Jets for 3 years, but I mean, the Jets, I mean, let's get real here. And then you had Byron Leftwich out there, which, he was getting to be predictable. And I know a lot of this is revisionist thinking and Monday morning quarterbacking and what other kind of adjective I can associate with this cliche. But I want someone that is going to give this Bucs team a chance to win. You as Bucs fans want someone to give this team a chance to win. We don't want, Joe Smith that was, the backup to the backup for the Miami Dolphins or the Cardinals. And you're like, I have no idea who that is, but I'm crossing my fingers and I hope he works, because we already have one unproven commodity at the QB position and Kyle Trask. And I don't want to, dig dirt on his grave before, he even gets here, but he's going to have to prove himself. And he's not, the margin for error and, people's leniency or what they're going to be able to stomach is not going to be that great. They're going to want a guy that goes out there and kills it, and is able to connect on passes and has chemistry with whatever this lineup is going to be. It is some interesting questions going on out there. We know the big ones out there: Levante David, Jamel Dean. We know Sean Murphy Bunting. And we know that some of those players that I listed there, amongst many others, are going to get the full court press from a lot of other teams in the NFL. And as it stands right now, the Bucs are looking at their piggy bank and there's only a couple pennies left in the bottom, and that's not enough to buy, a can of pop at the store. I'm from the North. I say pop. So what are you going to end up doing out there? It's a tough position. I think that, I think the Bucs are going to have to settle for mediocrity for the next couple of years. And, again, these so-called experts that I hear saying, well, I don't agree with that assessment that they're going to struggle. I think they're going to just pick up where Tom Brady left off. I can't get that drunk on creamsicle Kool-Aid that you guys are. And frankly, you better get a ride home. I'm talking about this Bucs team and what they have in the tank. And ultimately, again, I hope that they find a way to find that number one QB. I'm hoping that they can bring back Jamel Dean. I'm hoping they can bring back, Levante David and Sean Murphy Bunting, because the corner has struggled as well. So tough questions for the Bucs going forward, and who is going to be on the face of your Buccaneers going forward. And, it's interesting times going forward. Like I said, Levante David, Jamel Dean, Sean Murphy Bunting, but there's other guys that contributed as well. Akeem Hicks, Nassib came here, came back to this team and killed it. So it's just some tough questions going forward. The Bucs, ultimately, what I told everyone all along is that this team, everyone's like, well, what are you upset about, Dan? They're in the playoffs. It's if you steal someone's lunch money that can't fight for themselves, is that a real victory? Or do you feel like you just stole something from someone that was weak? The same thing goes for the Bucs here. They won the NFC South because the NFC South sucked. And, I know that everyone was all hyped in the locker room, and I'm like, yeah, I believe this, but ultimately I knew it was going to fall short, and it did. And, the thing of it is, it's difficult is even with Brady, the greatest, the GOAT, the greatest of all time, he couldn't even save this team. How is Kyle Trask and more unproven players going to do it? I don't want to be doom and gloom here, but I'm just saying, I hope that Jason Light and the Glazers and whoever's in the brain trust there, they can sign some players that are going to make this team competitive. That's my hope. That's the above all end all. A big Bucs fan will be, even if they're not playing that well, but I hope for nothing for the best for the Bucs going forward. They just need to solidify that quarterback position, and that's what we're hoping for. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the Bucs Report. Once again, you can find this podcast on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever. Also, go over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button. All you got to do is go to YouTube and type in the Bucs Report and hit that subscribe button. Make sure and give the videos a thumbs up. Leave some comments. It really helps grow the channel, and that's what it's about at the end of the day. All right, so once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of the Bucs Report, and I'll talk to you again next time.